Hello and welcome to the Garden of the Black Roses. This is fanfiction. More Ragnarok Online Fanfiction. I'm finding this really hard to read. Particularly now, going back. And yeah, the fact that I wrote this in 2002 is now 2022. So like at least 20 years ago. Wow, now I feel old after saying that. 20 years ago. Anyway. Still interesting. So this is chapter 13. Ara paced the floor of the meeting room in front of Alastor, Tadakono, Farama, Ferrari-sin, Syao and Phenomenon. Her eyes narrowed, going over everything she just heard. We're going to need to use Spirit of the Alchemist to assess her, but how to use it without her noticing? While she's sleeping? Phenomenon suggested. She wouldn't sense anything because she's not a soul linker. Does she sleep though? Asked Alastor. Farama shrugged and looked questioningly at Ferrari-sin. From what I've seen, Ferrari-sin replied, his eyes looking down at his hands. She doesn't sleep. She's up early, and still up when I fall asleep. He took a deep breath and sighed, though I've noticed she touches her chest a lot. He raised his hand and placed it over his heart, indicating where she touches. Then we'll have to risk it while she's awake then. Ara opened the door and walked with the others down the hall towards Chibi's lab. We don't have much time. If what's happening to her is what happened to the members of Velvet Touch of Inishi, then... Wait, Syao said suddenly. What happened to the Velvet Touch of Inishi members? Ara picked up speed, and the others followed suit. Loki is taking control of their guild, Alastor replied, walking next to Syao. Rena found their guild log. They were sided with the gods against Loki, but Loki sent against them multiple doppelgangers. They were overrun and basically grievously injured. Something about the blue gem doppelgangers causes those injured by their swords to fall under his command. Then you'll need to check us, Bright Eyes, Ilu, Mina, Trey, and Lack as well then, Tadakono informed him. We've all been injured by a doppelganger's sword. It's not that simple, Ara said, pausing just outside of Lack's bedroom. The requirements that cause one to fall under Loki's command isn't just an injury from the sword. It requires a moment of weakness, where the body's life and spiritual power diminishes to an almost absolute death. How badly harmed were you all? Phenomenon thought back. Myself, Trey, and Syao were burned and had shallow cuts. Tadakono had a deep cut, but he never reached near death. Bright Eyes, Ilu, and Mina lost consciousness, so maybe. Lack too. He was cut deeply into his shoulder and lost consciousness. And Chibi? Alastor asked. What sort of wound did she receive? Syao paused, remembering the sight he saw on that day. She was run through the chest by a doppelganger. She didn't lose consciousness, but her wound didn't heal until the doppelganger was dead. Then I'll check Lack, Alastor said to Ara. You go find Bright Eyes, Ilu, and Mina and check them quickly. I think it will take both of us to check Chibi. Silence gave Furama a feeling that there was more to this than they were saying. We'll meet back here before going to Chibi. Ara nodded and then ran off, quickly. Alastor knocked on Lack's door. You can come in. I heard everything you were saying out there. Alastor entered, leaving the others near the door. Lack was sitting on the end of his bed, pulling on his gloves. Chibi's blue ribbon sat curled on his desk. There's more than what you told them, isn't there? Alastor nodded. But first, he closed his eyes and cast Spirit of Monk. He moved his hand to touch where Lack's wound was. I see. Can you change to a stalker for me? Lack nodded and changed. What's wrong? Lack asked, slightly worried. Can you stay a stalker? Alastor asked. It seems that I'm going to need to call a professor from my guild. Spellbreak is the only thing that breaks the newly established link between Loki and the affected. Closing his eyes, he sent an emergency message to his guild. Receiving an almost instant reply, he sighed in relief. Haru will be here soon. I'll wait for him in the foyer, Ferrarison offered. Alastor nodded and watched Ferrarison leave. Why do I need to stay a stalker? Lack asked, confused. Because you can use 2 classes, Alastor replied, sitting on Lack's bed. The link to Loki is attached to your champion half, not your stalker half. You'll be safer as a stalker until Haru gets here. Ara stepped into the room, followed by Bright Eyes. I heard your call. I assume it was because Lack has a link? Bright Eyes has it too. The others are safe. Alastor and Lack got up. We should go check Chibi. Haru walked through the halls of Fight Club with Ferrarison. This place is huge, but I guess you're used to it. Oh wow, what happened here? Sorry, my writing's like either I've lost a bit or something's happened. Where are we going? To Chibi's lab. She has her own lab? Of course she does. She experiments on just about anything. You should see a grimoire. It's full of recipes, though all except the common ones are encrypted in a code that only she knows. He thought back to when he gave her her first grimoire she ever owned, in celebration of becoming a creator. I guess that means I'm the one responsible for getting her started experimenting in the first place. He gave a small smile. Anything wrong? Haru asked, noticing the smile. Nothing. Nothing at all. Chibi! Lack called, dodging a bomb. Furama looked at her eyes. They were pure blue, no light reflecting on them at all, almost glazed over. Lack jumped onto the long table separating them. Chibi, listen to me! Grant me my homunculus for this battle, Chibi called, throwing her embryo into the air. Her leaf appeared, its colouring a deep red instead of its usual forest green. Chibi threw out plant bottles while her leaf healed her. Summon Flora! Several large parasites created a wall around Chibi. Lack leapt and cast Sightless Raid. He landed directly in front of her. Chibi drew her sword and slashed Lack across the chest. He stepped back, clutching his clothes. "Stay where you are!" he barked at Tadakono and Phenomenon. "Let me deal with Chibi." Haru and Ferrari-san ran through the door as another bomb rocked the room. Ara and Bright Eyes looked back at them. "What's going on?" Ferrari-san yelled, holding onto a table for support. "Chibi's losing control," Ara replied, pulling Bright Eyes with her to Haru. "You need to use spell break on Bright Eyes, Lack, and Chibi, if we can get her still." Haru closed his eyes and placed a hand on Bright Eyes' chest. He delved deep into her life source and found the thread linking her to Loki. "Spellbreak," he whispered, mentally snipping the thread. Bright Eyes took a deep breath in. Her body felt lighter than before. "Weight lifted?" he asked. She nodded and gave a small smile. "Now where's Lack?" "He's dealing with Chibi," Ara replied, pointing to the battle on the other end of the room. They joined Tadakono and the others. Lack leapt back to them as well. "Not doing well?" Ara asked him, while Haru laid a hand on Lack's shoulder to delve into Lack's life source. "If I was a champion, it would be easier," he replied. He stood and drew his twin blades. "No need," Ara said with a smile. "When Haru is done, you can change into your champion health safely." "Spellbreak!" Lack leapt at Chibi again, transforming into his champion. His knuckle met her sword. He looked at her in the eyes. Chibi returned his stare and swung her sword hard, just missing his neck. Lack slid sideways and switched, snapping around her. Chibi stood still, watching him, her sword held ready in attack position. Lack continued to snap and prepare himself. "He's not going to," Phenomenon said with a gasp. "It's going to be overkill on her," Syao cried, starting forward. "Don't do it, Lack!" Tadakono gathered his power to use on resurrection. Ara looked at them confused. What is he going to do? "He's going to cast Ashura Strike," Tadakono replied as the room rumbled from Lack's fury. Haru shrugged. "It'll keep her still, though." Tadakono, Syao, and Phenomenon stared at him in disbelief. "He's never cast Ashura Strike on a guild member," Bright Eyes said with a sigh. "He pushes us with Palm Strike and throws spears at us, but never Ashura." She looked at Haru. "But you're right. It would make her stay still. I'm sure he'd use just enough strength to knock her out, but not kill her." "Ashura Strike!" screamed Lack. Chibi's eyes widened in disbelief as she fell to the floor. Lack sat down hard next to Chibi and poked her in the side, a little worried. Tadakono and Haru rushed over. "What were you thinking?" Tadakono asked, casting resurrection. Haru delved deep into Chibi's life force and cut the link. Lack sighed. "I wasn't. I hope I didn't hurt her too badly." Chibi moved and grabbed his wrist. Turning her head, she stared at him with clear sky blue eyes. "Can't believe you assured me," she murmured to him. Her leaf floated down, its color changing from deep red to forest green and patted her on the head. Couldn't you think of anything else? Nope, he replied with a smile. Besides, I'm sure you could have withstood it from me. That was full power, by the way. Chibi squeezed his wrist hard in a mock attempt to break it. Her blue eyes clouded again before returning to sky blue. Lack looked up at Haru, who looked confused. I broke her link to Loki for sure, Haru said. Ara and Alastor came forward with everyone, and together cast Spirit of Alchemist. It was difficult because the link was almost fully developed. Chibi sat up and Ara placed her hand on Chibi's heart. I see now, Ara said softly. She looked up at Tadakono and Phenomenon. You'll need to cast Resurrect as soon as I start. She looked at Chibi. This is going to hurt a lot. What are you going to do? Lack asked, staring hard at Ara. She drew her dagger. Ara! She has a shard in her chest from the sword, Ara replied, and plunged the dagger deep into Chibi's chest. Chapter 14. Chibi screamed out in pain. Bright Eyes looked away with tears in her eyes. Tadakono and Phenomenon cast Resurrect and Heal. Ara removed the dagger and placed 2 fingers into the cut. Lack took a hold of Chibi and held her still, his eyes clear and focused as he also cast Heal. Almost, Ara said, reaching in and pulling out a shard as long and almost as wide as her index finger. Got it! Pulling it hard, she removed it from Chibi's body. Chibi closed her eyes and went limp against Lack. That should release her completely from Loki's hold. Looking up at Lack, she added, We need to talk. About Velvet Touch of Inishi. Lack nodded and continued to heal Chibi. Ara, Alastor, Lack, Tadakono, Syao and Phenomenon sat together in Lack's room. Chibi laid curled up, asleep on his bed. Lack looked at Ara and Alastor, his eyes narrow and tired. Velvet Touch of Inishi members have the same thing Chibi had, Ara said softly. During their battle against Momo's doppelgangers, Lack raised his hand, causing Ara to pause. Who's Momo? Ara looked surprised. Kakaki was supposed to report to you. Lack shook his head. Anyway, Momo is one of Grand Lethal's new members. He's a creator, incredibly skilled in creating doppelgangers. Back to the point. Velvet Touch of Inishi had a great battle against his doppelgangers. During this battle, they fell to the swords and had pieces lodged within them. These pieces created links which allowed Loki to control them. Lack looked up at Chibi, whose blue hair could only be seen, and wondered what he'd do if she was completely taken by Loki. He shook his head and looked back to Ara. If we remove these shards... Difficult, replied Alastor. Our guild has tried. Rena herself suffered badly against Microrex and his brother John Flora. She had both myself and Ara as support. Lack thought it over. "I'll go," he said finally, and looked up at Syao, Tadakono, and Phenomenon. I'll need you three with me. Fen, you'll be support with Tada as secondary if things get really bad. We'll send a letter of challenge to Mike Rex and his brother. Hopefully, if things go well, we can get those two back to normal. Then, after that, things will get easier." "That's a lot of ifs," Alastor said, and looked behind him to Chibi. "Not taking her? She's going to murder you if you go without her." Alastor could feel the spiritual connection between Chibi and Lack. He wasn't sure what it was, but he knew it wasn't strong enough to be love. Perhaps siblings? They don't look alike, though. "She's going to stay put," Lack replied firmly. "I'll get Furama and Ferraris in to keep an eye on her." Mike Rex sat on his bed with Gemini nestled in his lap. "Should I go?" he asked her. She giggled and touched her ear. Smiling, Mike Rex blew her other ear. "Lack is challenging me to a duel, but it doesn't seem a fair duel. Him and 3 of his guildsmen against myself and my brother." "Do you know which guildsman?" Gemini asked, twisting around so she could rest her head against his neck. No, twisting around, not twisting her head. Oof. Mike Rex nodded. "Is Chibi one of them?" He shook his head. "Then you have nothing to worry about. With Chibi, you have to worry about how much one potion will heal them versus how fast John can heal. Without her there, it's even. Who's their support?" "Phenomenon," Mike Rex replied, looking at the parchment in his hand. "He's chosen Syao, Tadakono, and Phenomenon. Tadakono isn't that strong for a high wizard, and same goes for Syao. My only problem is that Fight Club members have gifts from the gods. If Chibi can turn into a cat, even if it is a binding, I wonder what the others can do." "Shouldn't worry you too much," she said, running her fingers down his chest. "If his choices are that bad, then accept his challenge." Mike Rex gave her a kiss and whispered, "You make a lot of sense, my queen." Lack stood, waiting in Clock Tower with Syao, Tadakono, and Phenomenon. The doors opened, and Mike Rex rode in on his Peko with his brother walking at his side. "You're finally here," Lack said to him. "You took your sweet time." "I had business that needed to be taken care of," Mike Rex replied. "Nothing that concerns you." He looked around the area. "Under the Shadows Guild watching? And no Chibi, I see. Left her at headquarters?" "That doesn't concern you," Lack replied, pulling his gloves tight. "You ready or not?" "I was going to ask you the same thing." Mike Rex readied his poleaxe. "Then let's go." Furama sat in the training room with Ferrari Sin and Trelawney. "There's nothing to do," whined Furama, as he broke a dead branch and a Faber popped out. It promptly began to attack him. "I hate bugs," Trelawney said, looking at the Faber. "Though I like that one. It becomes a creamy." Creamies are the only ones I like. They're so pretty. Ferrari-san sat leaning against a pole and yawned. I wonder how the battle is going. He threw a stone at the Faber, which promptly killed it. Chibi's sound asleep too, so we don't have to worry about her either. Trelawney's eyes darkened and went blank. Bound in the abyss rises a messenger for darkness. When mischief foreshadows the land, the people must rise. Deep within the earth, the silence is coming. It looms over us all. Justice will be spread, and the overpowered will be diminished. Only the dark messenger will rule in power. His sword will bring down his enemies with death at his command. Trelawney pressed her fingers to her head. I have a headache. I'll say, Farama replied, glancing over to Ferrari-san. Have headaches often? Recently they've been increasing in frequency. Trelawney laid down on the floor. I don't get why I have these headaches. Farama and Ferrari-san looked at each other. Neither do we. I'm going to go get something for my headache. Trelawney got up and wandered off to the infirmary. Farama thought over what he had heard. I think I can interpret some of that. Ferrari-san looked at him, impressed. I've been listening to Lak, Tada, Fen and Syao too much. He carefully went over some of the lines. Justice will be spread, and the overpowered will be diminished. That's got to mean Kashi's recent change to the world. Mischief could mean Loki. Then who's the Dark Messenger? Ferrari-san asked, half listening. Contra? Well, it fits, doesn't it? Farama asked. He's bound at the moment. He ruled in power before he was bound. And with the mediators missing, that means the hidden gods are down 4, leaving only Kashi and Novus left. Ferrari-san said nothing, hoping Farama was wrong. Assure a strike! Lak screamed, striking John Flora down. Micrex spun and blocked Ciaran's sword. John Flora fell to his knees, leaving Micrex alone. You're left, Lak said, breathing hard. Tadakono cast Lord of Vermilion, pushing Micrex back. Lak pulled out blue potions and replenished his magical power. Ciaran cast Berserk and began to slash at Micrex. Micrex bit his lower lip and cast Spiral Pierce. I knew this was a bad idea. He noticed Ara and Haru moved to his brother's side. Tadakono and Ciaran continued to push him away from John Flora. They're up to something. Lak cast Assura Strike on him. Micrex staggered. I've got to concentrate. John will hit me if he realized I wasn't focused on my battle. Micrex attempted to spiral pierce Lak, who snapped away quickly and came back to assure him again. Lak, Tadakono called. Ciaran heard him and began to attack Micrex with renewed fury. Lak jumped back and landed in a crouch at Tadakono's side. How much longer? My magical power is almost at its limit. Have anything else that's wide area that you can use that's less draining? Lak asked, taking in a few more bottles of blue potion. Me throwing one at you isn't going to do anything, although I think 2 more Assuras should do it. Phenomenon cast Kiri Elysion on them, and Lack prepared to cast Ashura Strike. Storm Gust, Tadakono replied, thinking, why didn't I cast that instead? I have a chance of freezing him. Tadakono switched to Storm Gust and within minutes froze Micrex. Breathing hard, he stopped and let Lack Ashura him. Micrex fell off his Peko to the floor. Now then, Lack said, cracking his knuckles. Time to get them back to normal. Chibi awoke to a dark room. Lack's bedroom. Why am I here, not in my room? Sitting up, she felt a sting on her chest. She stood and walked to the door, firmly shutting it, before turning on the light. It stings. What the hell did Ara do? She looked around the room and found a mirror hanging on the wall. Standing in front of it, Chibi pulled her top down slightly. On top of the thin white scar was a thicker pinkish scar directly over the middle of her breastbone. When Chibi examined herself, the door opened slowly, and a hand covered her mouth. You don't get away from me that easily. A creator of your abilities would be an asset to my plans. His lips brushed her ear as he spoke. Chibi looked fearfully in the mirror. Loki! She closed her eyes and grasped the emergency system. Lack! Loki's here! Someone answer me! Oh, no you don't, my pretty! Loki whispered, wrapping his arm around her throat. Chibi's vision blurred, her body feeling lighter than before. Footsteps sounded outside the room. Looks like we have company. Ferrari-san, Farama and Trelawney threw the door open in time to see Loki disappear into the shadows with Chibi. Lack is going to kill us, Farama said, punching the door frame. Lack stood frozen in place. Tadakono, Phenomenon shook as they healed Micrex. Syao fell to his knees. Ara looked at them curiously. What's wrong with you guys? Tadakono took a deep breath and forced his shaking to stop. Chibi just sent a message through our emergency system. Loki's at headquarters. Micrex opened his eyes and raised a hand to his forehead. Loki? Sitting bolt upright, he looked around and asked, Where? He's not here, Lack replied shakily. He's at Fight Club headquarters. With Chibi. Micrex stood and shook Lack hard. Are you crazy bastard? What are you doing here? Get going back there! He jumped up onto his Peko. And I'm coming with you! Phenomenon cast Warp Portal. Micrex shoved Lack through, and the rest followed. Loki is going to do the same thing he did to Momo to Chibi. Ara pulled Micrex to a halt as Ferrari-san ran out towards them. You need to explain what you mean, because it looks like we're too late. Micrex got off his Peko and grabbed a hold of Lack. Lack stared at him, his eyes dark and clouded. You need to snap out of it. Momo was my guild's creator. Loki saw his ability in creating homunculi and kidnapped him. Next thing we know, we are attacked by doppelgangers. Fight Club will be next if you don't wake up. Lack pushed Micrex away and looked at Ferrari-san. Guild meeting in 2 hours. Make sure the word gets around. Loki sat on his throne with Hell on his right side. Chibi stood locked in a giant upside-down glass vial. Momo placed a Loki's whisper into a flask and placed it over an open flame. Chibi banged her fists against the glass. The tube blocked her voice from reaching Momo. Gemini stepped into the room. After bowing to Loki, she walked over to the glass tube. Purple gas began to fill the tube. Chibi covered her ears, tears streaming down her face, and crouched down, curling into a ball. Gemini touched the glass. "Soon, Chibi," she whispered, her voice soft and alluring. "If you listen to the pretty voices, you'll be able to come out and be free." Loki frowned. "Is it necessary to do it this way, Momo?" He watched the tube steadily fill with purple gas. "It's inefficient, isn't it? To convert creators this way?" "It's efficient," Momo replied, his black eyes sparkling for a second, causing tears to form. "If she doesn't listen to the voices, the inhaled gas will bend her to your will." Loki stepped down and grabbed Momo's face. Picking him up, he tossed Momo into a similar tube and put him through the same treatment. Gemini stood and watching both tubes. "That's why I think it's inefficient," Loki grumbled. "It doesn't last long and requires reconditioning." Gemini leaned closer to Loki and stroked his cheek. "The more creators you have, the more chance they'll catch the moment they need reconditioning." She touched her chest. "Shards hurt much, and it takes longer for the creator to heal. You want a force to trample the gods sooner, don't you?" Whoop. Ooh, I lost my place. Lack stood before not only Fight Club guildsmen, but the guildsmen from Under the Shadows, 7 Deadly Sins, and Nothing. "I never expected other guilds to answer my call," he murmured to Lady Deathstrike, Renna, Mike Rex, and Bolois. "It affects us too," Lady Deathstrike replied, raising her hands for silence. "All right, everyone here knows the basic problem. As expected, our problems are larger than we first thought." She stepped aside to let Mike Rex speak. "Loki is capturing creators from all over Rune Midgard," Mike Rex announced, producing gasps from the crowd. "His aim is to have them create an army of powerful doppelgangers to take on the gods in his war. As far as we know," he indicated to the 4 guild masters with him, "Loki has Momo from my guild and Chibi from Fight Club." A large bang sounded from the foyer. Mike Rex and Lack looked at each other. Chibi stood before Loki, her eyes a deep blue color. "Momo and I have created 4 test doppelgangers. If it pleases you, you may watch their progress against Fight Club." She bowed, and Momo passed Loki a large round mirror with the Fight Club symbol on the back. "This mirror will give you viewing access into the headquarters." Loki ruffled Chibi's hair. Well done, Chibi. She bowed once more and walked away. A few tears fell from her eyes. Momo noticed and said nothing, gave his own bow, and followed her out. Now then! Loki and Hel looked into the mirror. Let's watch the excitement. Lack jumped and smashed a blue gem with his knuckle. Did Chibi create these? They're no different from the other ones. We outnumber them, so it won't be too hard to deal with them. This is endless, yelled John Flora over the noise. Mike Rex nodded and smashed another blue gem with his poleaxe. They're the same doppelgangers that attacked us. Lack's doppelganger fell into pieces of alcohol. Lack stared at the alcohol. Why alcohol? The other doppelgangers were falling apart as alcohol as well. Barlowus shot the last blue gem with a silver arrow. Slowly backing away, he yelled, "Run!" Lack turned and saw the final doppelganger falling apart. Bombs dropped onto the alcohol. Lack dived for cover. Fire filled the entire room. And that's it! Oh wow. So I lost a bit of the story there. I'm guessing when I was copying it over or doing something, I must have accidentally deleted a bit of it. That's okay. I can ad-lib. I ad-libbed. So if you go into that actual chapter, I'll have to check to see whether it has the words there or whether it has the disjointed paragraph that has a lot of it missing. Either way, it is what it is. It's an old story. There's going to be mistakes. There's going to be weirdness. There's going to be repetitiveness. Anyway, so like, comment, subscribe. And there are more characters popping up now from the other older guilds. So far, only Under the Shadows is a made-up guild. The other guilds mentioned, let me go back into it. Seven Deadly Sins and Nothing are actual real guilds at the time that I wrote this. Also, Velvet Touch of Inishi was also a real guild during that time. Anyway, yes, like, comment, subscribe. Tell me if you played this while this was going on, when this story was written, and who your character was, actually, now that I think about it. You could probably guess who mine was. Should be obvious. Anyway, I will see you in the next one, and as always, let your imagination grow wild. Bye for now.